people join as they come in.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today or this evening. We really appreciate it. You're joining one session among many sessions happening over this week for the National Solar Congress with Solar United Neighbors. At Solar United Neighbors, we bring people together to go solar and fight for their energy rights. And we have a few more sessions coming up this week, so I'll make sure to drop a link in the chat so you can learn more about the sessions and hopefully join us in the future. But today you are joining us for a conversation around expanding Arizona's renewable energy standards and just about the future of solar in Arizona. So we really appreciate being here. If you don't mind sharing, we'd love to hear from you all, just where you are in Arizona and maybe a short sentence about why you decided to join the call, but if not, just at least from where you are so we can see where everyone is tuning in from this evening. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Brett. He is our state director for Arizona, so he'll be going through a short PowerPoint, a little bit more about what's happening in your state, and then from there we'll be opening it up for a Q&A. So Brett, I will turn it over to you. And I am, I should have shared, I'm an engagement specialist with Solar United Neighbors. So I work with 6 different states on our engagement efforts on policy and also our co-ops.
Okay, great. And yeah, thanks everybody for joining. And we've got folks in the webinar mode right now. I think we'll keep you there until after the presentation, and then we'll allow folks to talk and share video if you want. But it would be great if you want to just post in the chat where you're listening in from this evening, whether that's in Arizona or maybe you're in another one of our states and you're just like super curious about what's happening with solar in the sunniest place in the country. So this is the agenda for the presentation tonight. This will take about a half an hour, and then we'll have about a half an hour for conversation and discussion. So I'm going to do just a really brief intro to Solar United Neighbors for those of you who are not familiar with us. And then I'm going to talk about renewable energy generally, and what's happening with renewable energy in Arizona, how much of it do we have, et cetera. I'm going to talk about the role of rooftop solar and battery storage in the energy future that we want to be creating, and then talk about the status of policy for renewable energy today in Arizona and what the current debate is for what we should be doing going forward, and what the opportunities are for folks like yourselves to engage in that discussion. And then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. And in addition to telling us where you're coming from this evening, please put any questions that you might have in the chat, and hopefully I'll cover them either during the presentation or afterwards. So as Lisa said, Solar United Neighbors is a nonprofit organization. We're working to build a new energy system with rooftop solar at the cornerstone. Our mission is to help people go solar, join together, and fight for energy rights. Some of you may know us by joining one of our solar co-op programs, which is our bulk purchasing program for rooftop solar for homeowners, where groups of neighbors will come together and get solar in a group process. And then we facilitate, discussions and community building around solar and other clean technologies for people to come together. And we help people fight for their energy rights and do advocacy around solar. And a lot of that is, based on the policies that we're working on, which I will share throughout this presentation. So Solar United Neighbors, we're in 12 states and Washington, D.C. We started in 2007. And Arizona is the newest state program. So we've been doing work in Arizona for just about 1.5 years. And in that time have actually done a lot. And I personally have been involved in energy policy and environmental work in Arizona for over 11 years, and came onto the Sun team 1.5 years ago to get the program started. So this is a snapshot of the Arizona team. Solar United Neighbors has more than 40 staff across the country, but here, this is a slice of the team that works on Arizona issues. So Lisa, our engagement specialist, is on with us today. And of course, I'm here as the program director, but we have a lot of cross-cutting staff that help us run co-op programs and equity work and policy work. So I want to start this presentation with a really basic question that most of you probably know the answer to, but just what is renewable energy? And this is important as we're talking about policy because it is important how you define what types of energy that you're talking about and want to work with and want to promote. And so in Arizona, there's a legal definition that's used for renewable energy, which is energy resources that are rapidly replaced, and explicitly does not include fossil fuels or nuclear energy because both of those sources use fuels like uranium for nuclear or coal or gas for fossil fuels that are finite and sort of need to be mined and otherwise used. So renewable energy is defined as resources like solar and wind, hydro power, geothermal energy, et cetera. And there are a lot of benefits like for using renewable energy. So why are we using it? And again, a lot of you probably know this, but renewable energy is zero emissions, so no emissions from for things that are harming our climate or for air pollution. Parts of Arizona, especially where I live in Phoenix, we have all these bad air days, and so having less pollution from our energy is really important. Renewable energy is increasingly cheap. It's beating out fossil fuels in most instances today. And so we're going to see a great expansion of renewable energy just because it's the least cost option as utilities and energy providers are looking to what types of resources to use in the future. And part of why it's cheap is there's no fuel costs associated with renewable energy. So you don't have to dig up and burn the sun. You can just use it and use the power of the wind that's blowing. So those sources are good over time. And those renewable fuels are virtually unlimited. So we are not going to necessarily run out of solar, especially in our lifetimes. Renewable energy is safe to use, so it doesn't have some of the downsides like an oil spill or a nuclear accident would have. And then there's local jobs that are created through renewable energy. So you can't outsource jobs for installing solar on rooftops in our communities. And then in Arizona, and I've got a slide about this next, there's a lot of water savings benefits associated with using renewable energy and solar. So you're not needing water to produce energy like you do in a coal plant or a gas turbine. And so there's a lot of important water savings that we can have by using solar energy. So recently there was a presentation done at the Arizona Corporation Commission on the benefits of solar related to water use. And I thought it was really kind of amazing statistics that I wanted to share with you as we're thinking about using solar and renewable energy more in the future. So this study showed that if we increase, today about 4% of Arizona households have solar on them. If that was increased to even just 25%, we could save 4 billion gallons of water every year just from energy production in the state. And those numbers just rise as you rise the percentage of households that have solar and just the percentage of our energy use that comes from solar. So a really great benefit that's often not quantified or actually valued in the state, at least to date. So this is where Arizona's energy mix comes from, and this data is a couple of years old. It's from the Energy Information Administration. This is their most up-to-date figures that they publish regularly on their website. It's a federal agency. And in Arizona, we get most of our power today from nuclear, coal, and natural gas. And we have the largest nuclear power plant in the country. Palo Verde Nuclear Power Plant produces the most energy of any nuclear facility in the country. So that's about 30% of electricity generation. Coal is on its way out, so most coal plants in Arizona will be closing in the next 12 years. And natural gas plants have been in increasing, sort of picking up the tab in a way, but increasingly the solar is really going to eat into as coal goes away, and utilities see solar plus storage as a way to more cheaply provide energy than solely just switching to gas, which is a big flip from where they were just a couple of years ago. And so solar energy has grown in Arizona vastly over the last decade. So this chart shows the annual additions for solar energy. The dark blue baseline is residential energy installations, so rooftop solar, and then the yellow is non-residential. So those are commercial installations like the solar on an IKEA. The light blue is utility scale. And you can see in 2019, we had a huge boom in solar installations, and that was largely due to federal tax policy. So there was a federal investment tax credit that was worth 30% of the cost of the system. That went down to 26% this year. And so a lot of projects were put in the pipeline to be able to get done before that. Arizona is actually 5th now in the country for the amount of solar we have installed. We've slipped down from, I think we were 2nd and 3rd at some points, and now we're 5th. The next slide actually has the top 10 states, if you're curious about that. There's almost 8,000 people that work in the solar industry in Arizona, so we're 6th in that statistic, and over 150,000 homes have rooftop solar throughout the state, and that number is growing. APS says that they get about 1,800 applications every month for rooftop solar in the state. So these are the top 10 states according to the solar industry. California is obviously #1. And then at this point, North Carolina, Florida, and Texas have passed up Arizona. And so we certainly want to do more to put ourselves higher up that list. And then someone mentioned net metering, and we can definitely talk a little bit more about net metering and the rollbacks that took place a few years ago in Arizona. And this chart really tells that story. So back in 2016, the end of 2016, the Arizona Corporation Commission, which we'll talk more about later, basically got rid of net metering, which was the key policy that gave solar owners that one-to-one credit for the solar being produced. So whatever your solar sent back to the utility, you get credited just as if you would have bought the energy from the utility at that time. Doesn't work like that anymore for most utilities in the state. And so now there's a monthly credit that is per kilowatt hour credit that's given to extra solar from customers. And it's worth less than the retail value of solar in Arizona. So it's made solar less affordable and less economical, but it still pencils out in most cases. And so you can still go solar, but that credit is declining over time. And so you can see the impact of the policy on this chart. This chart is from the most recent APS shareholder presentation. So Pinnacle West is the holding company for APS. And you can see in September of 2017 on the gray bar, when the net metering policy initially went away, that's the huge sort of everyone was trying to get in, and then it really dropped off. And then installations have kind of hovered there. But if you look at the annual residential rooftop additions in the top right corner, you can see that they're kind of going down year by year. And that's been the impact of the new net metering policy. And if folks have more questions about net metering and the export rates and how it works now, we can definitely talk about that afterwards. So, but there's been a huge role for rooftop solar in Arizona and in other states. That's really important, both for consumers and households, and the energy system as a whole in the electricity grid. So solar obviously provides local renewable energy that's produced and consumed on site. So there's a lot of efficiencies built into that model where you're not needing to build large and expensive facilities and transmission lines to take that power into cities. You're just putting it on your roof and you're consuming it right there. That lowers people's energy bills right away, as folks that already have solar know. And then it reduces the overall electricity demand on the system, which can bring benefits to all ratepayers and everyone that's out there, because it means the utility doesn't have to build new and expensive power plants to be able to meet supply on especially those really hot days in the summer where the energy grid is stressed the most. And so we've seen some charts recently from some of our friends in California that were showing us, on those days where the grid was really stressed out, rooftop solar basically saved the day, because in the middle of those really hot days, people were using less power than projected because of rooftop solar, and so can really benefit the grid. And then we discussed earlier, you don't need water to generate this power, and in a drier and drier climate in the future, that's going to be really important. And then home battery storage really has an increasing role for households and for the electricity system as a whole. And I bring this up because there's a really robust conversation going on as we're talking about expanding Arizona's renewable energy goals about what the role for home battery storage is in that future. And so a lot of people, when you get storage, you're pairing it with a rooftop solar system, and that really improves the value of the energy equation when you have solar plus storage. So traditionally, a battery system would act like a generator and provide backup power if your power goes out in a monsoon or for whatever other reason. And so you'd be able to keep your fridge on and your food wouldn't go bad. You'd be able to keep some fans on to stay cool or charge your phone, those types of things. Increasingly, folks are using battery storage to do two things. So one is to offset expensive peak energy. And when the utility charges a premium for energy use, so APS, for example, energy is more expensive between 3 and 8 p.m. Monday through Friday if you're on a time of use or a demand rate plan, which is pretty standard for a lot of us that have APS now. And so if you have a solar system with storage, when the sun goes down right around this time, it's 6:20 and it's just gotten dark, but my power is still expensive from APS, so I can charge the battery with extra solar during the day, and I can draw from that battery right now for the next hour and a half to offset having to pay APS for more expensive energy up until 8 o'clock. So that's one way that batteries can sort of be paid back through their usage. And then another way is still a little theoretical here in Arizona and most other places, but is increasingly discussed, which is this idea of aggregating stored battery energy and using it like a virtual power plant. So the utility would provide incentives upfront for folks to install storage. And by providing those incentives, they would say, okay, so 10% of whatever's in your battery we can use that if we need to during certain times. And so on these really hot days when the system is stressed out, the utility can go in and draw from tens of thousands of home batteries that are powered by rooftop solar to help to meet the demand during those days, and can do so cheaper than building and running a new power plant, and it's obviously cleaner than doing that as well. So, but of course, you want to get credited for any energy that the utility is taking out of that battery. So we need to come up with tariff programs that say, okay, for any stored energy the utility takes during key times, they're going to pay you per kilowatt hour of any energy that they take. So the rules of the road still need to be defined on that here, but it's certainly part of the conversation and the way that we're thinking about this grid of the future moving forward. So what is our renewable energy policy today in Arizona? We have something called the Renewable Energy Standard and Tariff, or the REST. And so if you're kind of in the know, you call it the REST, because the other name is very long. But this policy requires big regulated utilities, including APS and TEP, Tucson Electric Power, to sell 15% renewable energy by 2025. And they have to meet benchmarks every year to hit up to that mark. This year is 10%. And then 4.5% of sales need to come from rooftop solar systems by 2025. So that was kind of the key piece that helped to drive rooftop solar adoption early in Arizona. And this was established back in 2006 by the Arizona Corporation Commission, which is the utility regulator in the state. We'll talk a little bit more about them and what they do. So I want to compare Arizona to other states on renewable energy standards, because other states have taken some really big and bold actions as we're looking towards kind of 2030 and mid-century, especially around climate and clean energy targets. And so I have some more detailed information about our neighbors on the next slide, but you can kind of see that there's a lot of states that are setting 100% carbon-free electricity goals with interim targets along the way, like 50% renewable energy. So this is a trend throughout the country that Arizona has fallen behind on. So just taking a little bit of closer look to our West Coast neighbors here and how we stack up. So next door in California, they've passed a law where they're going to be a 60% renewable by 2030 and 100% carbon free by 2045. In New Mexico next door, they're going to 80% renewable energy by 2040 and 100% carbon free by 2045. Nevada, similar, 50% renewable by 2030, 100% carbon free by 2050. And we're still stuck at 15% renewable by 2025, which is only 5 years away. So, just even looking at our competitive advantage to our neighbors, and there are many. One lens this is being looked at is economic development in the state, and there are so many big companies these days that have huge renewable energy goals, and they need renewable energy to power their facilities because of those goals. And they may decide to relocate or locate into different states if they're looking at Arizona, because they can't get the renewable energy that they need because the policy just isn't up to snuff for where our neighbors are going. So that's one argument that's being made to increase our targets. Our utilities, however, have recently actually made pretty strong voluntary commitments to carbon reductions and in some cases renewable energy. So APS at the beginning of this year came out and said they'll be 45% renewable by 2030 and 100% carbon free by 2050. So that was a pretty big announcement. TEP in their latest resource planning filing is saying they're going to be 70% wind and solar by 2035 and 80% carbon reductions by that same year. And then SRP was the first Arizona utility to set carbon reduction goals. And so they're not quite as strong as these more recent commitments, but SRP is aiming for a 62% CO2 reduction by 2035 and 90% carbon reductions by 2050. So of course, these are kind of non-binding voluntary commitments. Well, in SRP's case, the board did approve it, but as far as the state regulators for APS and TEP, they still don't have kind of rules around these commitments and ways to hold them accountable should they decide to change their minds. And so that's a big reason. That's another big reason why we've been discussing advancing the goals, even in light of these voluntary commitments. So I've mentioned the Corporation Commission a few times, and they're a really, really important piece of how energy policy gets decided in Arizona. It's the ACC for short. And this is a 5-member body that's elected in statewide races. So these are partisan races. If you have your 2020 ballot, there are 6 different candidates up, 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans for the ACC seats this year. And they hold office for 4-year terms. And every 2 years, it switches the amount of seats that are up. So this year it's 3 seats, and in 2 years it'll be 2 seats. And to get anything done at the ACC, you need 3 votes to be able to have a majority. So this body regulates industries like railroads and securities and some interesting things, but for our purposes, they regulate electric utilities. They set rates and allow utilities to charge certain prices and recover costs. And they also largely set the energy policy in the state, including the renewable energy standard. And in general, one thing that we look to the ACC to is to hold utilities accountable. So setting targets for them to meet, if they're behaving badly, to rein them in. Utilities are, as folks know, they're monopolies, right? So they have a captured customer base. They have a regulated rate of return, which is usually around 10%. And so to get those things, they need to comply with and be regulated by state officials, which have, in recent times in Arizona, to be frank, have failed to do so. So that's been a big topic of conversation if you're following energy policy in Arizona. So what are we talking about at the ACC right now? We are looking to update the renewable energy standard and tariff in an overall package that, if you're kind of inside the building, we've started calling it the energy rules. And so it's because these energy rules are really covering a broad swath of energy standards and policies that are going to kind of govern how the state works moving forward. And this is ranging from setting carbon emissions reduction targets, setting renewable energy targets, energy efficiency and those goals, rooftop solar and battery storage. How do those play roles in the energy system we want to create? Just transition, which is really important topic should be an important topic for everyone. There are folks that are working, especially with tribes and the Navajo and Hopi nations, around what is owed to tribal communities and coal plant locations that have given us their environment and air quality and water table to provide cheap electricity over time with the coal plants that are on their lands. And what do the utilities and the rest of us owe them to be able to transition into a clean energy future? And so that's a big conversation that's also going on. And not as exciting but important is resource planning for utilities and making that process more transparent and more public. So actually having more stakeholder involvement in that process. So a little more than a year ago, we signed on to something called the Joint Stakeholder Proposal, and this was filed at the Corporation Commission and has kind of become the basis of our negotiations with commissioners and with others around what we want the energy system to look like in Arizona going forward. And we signed on to this proposal with more than 30 other nonprofit organizations and business groups and faith groups, and we can certainly kind of share this with anyone that wants to read it. It's kind of a long document, but I've broken down the goals here, which is to get to 100% carbon free by 2045, 50% renewable by 2030, increase that rooftop solar goal to 10% by 2030, increase energy efficiency to 35% by 2030. And so that's just a amount of energy savings that the utilities need to meet. Doing work around this just transition issue, and then reforming the utility planning process. So it's a really big suite of things that we've been working on. And mostly for Solar United Neighbors part, we've been really focused on the distributed generation targets and what rooftop solar and battery storage look like in this new energy system. And so what's being discussed now at the commission? So I'll spare anyone from, unless you're spending your hours and days watching these proceedings, which you may want to do. I can definitely help you access them, but it's part of my job. And so I can give you kind of a quick report here, which is that commissioners do seem to agree on the energy efficiency targets. They actually voted to move forward with that last week, and a big win for our friends that work in energy efficiency. And then they also seem to agree on getting to 100% carbon-free electricity. And at this point, it's not a big lift. It's something many others. It'll be a big lift, but it's not a big lift politically for them to support it. It's something many other states are committing to. It's something the utilities are already committed to. And so, we're really focused on kind of what are the details in what that's going to look like in the nearer term, and how does that, how do rooftop solar and other distributed resources like storage play a role? And so those are some of the things that are still on the table and being discussed. And I should say the carbon goal is still on the table and being discussed, but it's likely to be supported. So one of the things, and I'll get into a little bit more here in a second, is a standard and programs for distributed storage, and what that could look like for increasing home battery storage adoption and use. Creation of a community solar program in Arizona, and how we can expand the access of solar to folks that can't put solar on their roof for whatever reason, to being able to subscribe to projects. And then things still being discussed are around resource planning and the just transition and equity pieces. So I've talked a little bit about distributed storage already, and this is a kind of a quick graph on sort of how storage fits into the system on a typical home. And I apologize for using some sort of insider speak here, so I'll try to get to it. But basically we're looking at there have been proposals of the commission to set a standard for using home battery storage into the future. So we're probably looking at a standard that's getting X% of storage by 2035. And that'll be measured by utility peak demand, most likely. So that's that kind of peak load, really hot day of the year when the utility is using the most power, meeting a percentage of that with storage, and having it sort of on hand throughout the year by incentivizing households to install storage. And so to get there, we'll need to have upfront incentive programs, which actually APS and the commission agreed to a pilot program recently, where APS is going to have a upfront cash incentive for installing battery storage. And then we still need to come up with and direct the utilities to come up with tariff programs these are the programs to credit battery storage customers for any energy that the utility would need, and create some of those rules of the road. So what if you want to opt out of having the utility do that? You'd be able to do that, and there would need to be a rule about how that works. Or you want to make sure that my battery storage credits are showing up on my bill every month, and I can really calculate the value of those, and what are the value of those. So those are all things that we still need to figure out. But these rules can basically say, we're gonna aim to have this much battery storage by this time in the future. And to get there, we're going to provide these incentives and create these programs to make sure that people are getting credited for the use of the battery. And then community solar, this is a diagram from our website on how generally a community solar structure works. There's been language for community solar in some of the proposals at the commission now, because it doesn't exist in Arizona yet. So this is a really big opportunity to expand being able to use solar for folks that maybe rent their home and can't do home improvements like installing panels, are lower income customers and can't afford solar panels, or maybe you live in an apartment or another type of building that you can't install solar on. So ideally, this would be third parties or nonprofits that would come in, develop systems, solar, mid-sized solar arrays. You'd be able to subscribe to that solar facility, and there would be credits that you get back on your bill because the utility would get that power, and they would credit you for whatever percentage of the system that your subscription makes up. So if you buy 10%, subscribe to 10% of a system, 10% of that output of the system would ideally be put back on your bill as some form of a credit. And then the credits would be worth more than what you'd pay to subscribe. And so your bill would actually go down by, 20, 30 bucks a month, whatever you're getting back for that array. But again, this policy exists in like a dozen or more other states, places like Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland, Oregon, but not here in Arizona yet. And so it's a big opportunity that we could kind of put the rules of the road down for and get going on. I just have a couple more slides and then we'll open it up for more of a discussion. But the Corporation Commission is meeting next Thursday, the 29th, where they're going to have some deeper discussion about some of the issues that we've just been talking about here tonight. And they may vote on moving a final package forward that would start a formal rulemaking process. So kind of what happens from here is and I won't spend too much time on the process here because I find it kind of boring and I like more of the policy framework, but basically the formal rulemaking process kicks off a 30-day public comment period. So that would be a good time to weigh in on what's being discussed. And importantly, because of the timing now, the formal final vote wouldn't happen to codify these rules until next year when a new commission is being set. And so just to be frank, there's a lot of kind of political discussions going on right now about how is the election for the new commissioners going to shake out and what may the new commissioners support or not. And, this process may kind of start over again in some way, and we would be having new discussions depending on the outcome. So that is possible as well. But what you can do in the meantime, if you feel so inclined, is you can contact your commissioners, and you can definitely contact me if you want some more information. But this is an important week for commissioners to hear from constituents about some of these issues because they haven't voted on distributed storage or community solar or some of these topics, and so it'd be important for them to hear from you. And tell them that you support that. And if you do want to be like me and spend your time watching the commissioners debate these issues, you can do so through a live stream on the commission website, or there's a phone number to call in. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining, and hopefully you learned a little bit about Arizona and kind of where things stand. And I'm excited to hear from you more about what you might want to know, and this is how you can contact me. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Brett. We do have a few questions in the chat. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, and maybe I'm gonna stop sharing and then I can see the chat. But yeah, could you pick some of the questions out?
Yes, I can. Just to start, Carrie, it's not really a question, but she's interested in the net metering in Arizona, which you did talk about. So Carrie, if there's anything specific you have a question about, feel free to drop in the chat. Someone else is also interested about battery storage. Again, I think it would be best, Barbara, if you don't mind, if you have specific questions about battery storage, maybe drop it in the chat. And then there was a question from Jeff. Give me 1 second. This was based off one of your slides. It says, does this solar 4.6% exclude behind the meter production? That typically is the case, drawing data only from utility scale.
Yeah, so I think I'm not sure which slide I was alluding to, I'm sorry, Jeff, but the 4.5% standard for distributed generation today is from rooftop solar, and so that is behind the meter. But you might be looking at the generation pie charts, which was around 4.6% of total generation, and so I'm not sure if that's the case or not, because we do in Arizona have distributed generation production meters that are installed on homes when you get a rooftop solar system installed on your home. And so the utility can easily track all of the production coming from solar, but I'm not sure how much of that is counted by the Energy Administration or not. So.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brett. We have a few more questions here from Carrie. I understand we should get people at 100% offset right now. Is that correct? I'm not sure if that's enough information.
Yeah, it honestly, so the question is understanding we should get people at 100% offset, which I think is related to when you go solar, you can kind of work with your solar installer to determine how much of your electricity use you want to offset by installing solar panels. And it used to be that you would basically try to max out how much solar you could install, depending on your budget, right? All of this depends on how much money you have to spend on the system. But it used to be you could size it to 100% of your use or a little bit more. You can usually go up to, I think the state rules are 125% here in Arizona. But now that we've gotten rid of net metering, it often doesn't make economic sense, depending on your utility, to get all the way to 100%. More often now, solar installers are working with customers to match your consumption patterns with your solar, and then you can really max out drawing most of your energy from the solar array during key times. But it wouldn't offset 100% of your use throughout the year, because you're not able to bank those net metering credits any longer month to month in the state. You just get every month they look at how much extra solar you sent back, and they give you a dollar amount for those credits. And it's just not economic anymore to really overproduce and sell solar back to the utility at a lower price. And so I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We have a few more here. So Barbara asks, how can you demonstrate a cost benefit to people who install battery storage systems? Batteries are pretty expensive right now.
Yeah, I think it goes back to a couple of things. So one is if you do experience frequent utility outages and it's worth something to you to be able to have backup power, then some people just make that investment because they want to be able to have power if the power goes out. But as far as getting using a battery to kind of pay itself off, it's increasingly possible in some places like where I just described, where you have a utility that is giving you less credit back for your solar. So, let's say APS is giving you 10 cents back for every kilowatt hour of solar you send to them, but you have to pay APS like 14 cents for every kilowatt of energy you buy from them. And so it actually makes more sense to bank your extra solar during the day into the battery, instead of selling it back to at 10 cents, you then can use it to offset what you would have needed to pay them for 14 cents right at this time of day, like 6:30 to 8 p.m. And over time, that could add up for you depending on how you use energy. The cost of batteries are going down and the incentives are still available on tax credits. And then there are new utility incentives being created to deploy battery storage. So it could make it more possible in that way.
Great, and we have here from Carl, solar PV owner here with net metering. TEP is my utility. If I were to add solar panels or battery storage, would that nullify my net metering?
I believe the answer is no. You're grandfathered in to your system for 20 years, but you would have to check. It's always good to double check, especially if you were to add more. Definitely not on battery storage, but adding more solar, you need to check.
So we have a question here. Is there any move or legislation concerning standardization for the entire state versus all utilities having separate standards, SRP, others that don't have to abide by ACC?
Yeah, really, really great question. So it's possible that Arizona will see something like this this year. Depending on the makeup of the legislature will depend how much political capital and will and possibility there is on this. But there was a recent Arizona Supreme Court case that kind of opened the door to say the legislature may have more authority than the Corporation Commission to set an overarching policy like a renewable energy standard. And so it could be possible that the legislature would test that case by trying to pass a renewable energy standard this year. And depending on the makeup of the legislature, that could end up being a good thing or a bad thing. So that we may see that happen next year. And then it's an interesting legal question on where does SRP fall? If the legislature were to pass something, they may have authority over SRP on it, but it may end up getting litigated in a court. A judge would need to decide because, as folks may know, Salt River Project in Arizona is a very, very unique utility that's been kind of self-regulated. So.
Thanks, Brett. Another question here from Carrie. Doesn't the battery also have to be backed up with a generator to be off the grid? And then she also mentioned, what about the Sherman Antitrust Act?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not an expert on off-grid systems, so I wouldn't be able to necessarily answer that. I think I have seen examples of systems that are basically just hooked up to solar and to batteries and don't need a gas generator, but I'm not an expert on that area. And then I'm also not an expert on the Sherman Antitrust Act. I do think that there's a lawsuit against SRP from some solar customers invoking an antitrust position on their rooftop solar rates, but we're not involved in that lawsuit.
Thank you. Those are all the questions that are in the chats currently. Would you like to open it up to anyone who might want to?
These are really great questions, and really appreciate the dialogue. I think Arizona, I was looking to see where folks are from, and it's awesome to have a lot of folks from Arizona here with us, and some folks that are not from Arizona. We've got somebody from Michigan and Minnesota And so I'm from Wisconsin originally. So this whole, folks may know in Arizona, we just broke the record for days over 100 degrees. I think it's been 145, so like half of the year so far. And it's been a struggle, and I think a lot of us are really glad that October is here. So. And so Carl's asking, for those of us that may want to send an email to the ACC commissioners, what are the key talking points again? Thank you, Carl. That's a great question. I will, when we follow up from this webinar with everyone, Lisa and I can send that information. And we really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Carl. We also have a question here from Jeff. He has a 3.63 kilowatt rooftop system installed in 2009 in APS territory. I'd like to increase the size of my system. Is this an option?
Yes, it is. So you should check with APS to make sure that you need to get another interconnection approval, which any solar installer can help you do. But you would just need to make sure that it's not going to impact your grandfathering status because you still have net metering now, and you wouldn't want to give that up. So this is a good question that I just need to go back in and double check, but you should definitely double check. And so if the installer that did your system back in 2009 is still around, it'd be good to check with them on expanding it. Otherwise, you could call around and see, or join one of our co-ops at some point. But yeah, and if it was Tesla, then they're definitely still around. So. Yep.
We also have another question from Carrie. Can you start with a lease and then switch to a purchase in Arizona?
That's a good question. It depends on the contract of the lease, as I understand it. So, leases are not, leases work for some people if you don't have the tax liability to take the solar tax credit, which this year is 26%, next year is 22%. The cost of the total installation you can write off on your federal taxes, and there's a $1,000 state tax credit. If you lease a system, the company that sold you the lease gets to take that tax credit instead, and so the lease may do that, but then you don't have to pay for it up front or whatever. Most people, because if they do have access to financing, can get a decent, because rates are so low, especially now, you can really get access to decent financing rate to just purchase the system with a loan. There are different types of loans that folks can use. And that may be a better deal for you in the long term because you'll own the system, you'll be able to take the tax incentives up front. And as far as starting with the lease and then switching to purchase, there may be a clause in the contract to buy out the remainder of the lease to own the system, but I think those vary company by company, and it really depends. And then as far as the cost of solar, it really does depend. We don't share specific numbers from our solar co-op bids, but in Arizona, I would say we usually see something around $2.50 a watt. Can be less, can be more. It depends where you are and how much solar you're buying.
Great. Well, I think that may be all of our questions. We'll just wait one more minute here in case there's a straggler. Thinking that we probably reached everyone though. So we just want to take a moment to thank each of you so much for your time today. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you to Brett for telling us all about Arizona policy and ways that we can get plugged in. And thank you to each of you for spending your Monday evening with us. We hope you'll join us for another session coming up this week. You can look up more of our sessions on our website that I dropped earlier in the comments. And we also wanted to take a moment to share that we do have a number of solar co-ops open right now. They're free to join and a really great opportunity to connect with neighbors. And the great thing is that if you decide to go solar with the co-op, you can also go solar at a discounted rate. So I will drop that link in the chat also, so you can check out all of our co-ops across the country. And we hope you will join us for another session and also just get involved with us in Arizona or wherever you are in the country to come together and fight for our energy rights and go solar. So thank you again, everyone, and hope you have a good rest of your evening.
Thanks everybody so much. Take care.